Welcome, readers. Thank you for being dedicated to growing as readers today and checking back in with our channel. I'm really excited to be on part 2 of our biographies unit. I've got a new anchor chart here that we're going to go over, and today we're going to really focus in on what do biographies want to inform us about. There's 4 main sections, and today we're going to go over 2 of them. One of them is childhood. This book, Jane, really went through more of the time when she was a child, and then we're also going to focus on traits. In this book, actually, we pulled out some. We could infer what some character traits are based on what we learned from Jane Goodall in the story, Jane. So when an author of a biography wants to inform us, they're definitely going to give us some information. So one of the aspects is childhood. The author is going to teach us a little bit about when and where the person was born or their family. Now in this book right here, we know that as a child she received Jubilee as a gift. We also know that as a child she liked to lay out in the backyard and watch animals pass by, and she studied them. We also know that because of her grandmother's chicken coop, she was able to discover some things about chickens. So we know that a little bit about Jane's childhood, and we know a tiny bit about her family, but that gives us more information than what we had at the start of this. Now also it's going to talk about traits, and that means character traits or physical traits. Physical traits are like Jane had blonde hair, she has a beautiful smile. Other things like character traits are things that might be said, but we also might infer. We might make a good guess about them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think back to the story, and I'm going to say, one day curious Jane wandered. So Jane, a trait of hers is she's curious. She is dedicated. She would sit out there and watch and wonder. She was inquisitive. That's another word for wonder. She really wanted to know how things worked. So we can pick up some of her character traits just by looking at really thinking deeply about the story. So now I want to know more. I want to know more about Jane Goodall because yes, we saw something about childhood, and yes, we learned a little bit about traits, but I want to get some more information. So we're going to read my second book about Jane Goodall, Little People, Big Dreams, because I want to know more. I want to know more about this fascinating person. And this book, I could tell I'm going to learn more just because there's a lot more content, a lot more words on every single page. It still looks like a beautiful picture book, but it is a biography. It's a nonfiction text written to inform me about Jane Goodall. So I'm going to get started on reading this wonderfully illustrated and written book, and let's see if we can find out more about Jane Goodall's childhood, and we can kind of infer more character traits that best describe Jane. So here we go, Jane Goodall. When Jane was a little girl, her father gave her a stuffed chimpanzee named Jubilee. She carried him everywhere she went. We knew that from the other story. Jane loved animals very much. She wanted to live in the jungle with wild chimpanzees, just like the heroes of her bedtime stories, Tarzan and Jane. At night, her mother read her their adventures. But Jane could not afford to go to college to study animals. That's a new childhood detail that we did not know. So she would have to study them in her own way. She saved every penny she had until she could buy a boat ticket to Kenya in Africa. That tells me something about her character. Definitely tells me that she's dedicated. Even though she couldn't go to college, she could have given up. But no, because of her dedication and how she saved every penny she had to make it happen, that tells me that Jane is a dedicated person. When she arrived, Jane met a well-known scientist named Louis Leakey. He was looking for a chimpanzee researcher willing to study them in the wild. He thought that they could learn about humans by studying apes. It was the opportunity Jane had been waiting for. When she arrived, Jane met a well-known scientist named Louis Leakey. he was looking for a chimpanzee researcher willing to study them in the wild. He thought that they could learn about humans by studying apes. It was an opportunity Jane had been waiting for. Wow, that is really, really exciting. So we know that maybe she's not really into her childhood yet, but we are now seeing that this is an important part of her life, is that when she met a well-known scientist named Louis Leakey, and together, that was the opportunity she had been waiting for. I'm hooked. I can't wait to finish reading this book. Now it's your turn to think about which biography you want to read today. Get in your comfy spot with your book. And as you're reading today, I want you to dive deep into asking yourself, what has the author told me about my person's childhood? What has the author written so I can think deeply about the character traits of this person that I am reading about in this biography? So I'm going to keep reading. You start reading. When you're done with your allotted time, go ahead and hit play again, and we'll be back soon to talk more about Jane Goodall and think deeper about your character, their childhood, their physical and character traits. See you in a bit. Welcome back, readers. I've enjoyed my book so much. Maybe you haven't finished yours yet, but I hope you have discovered some of the childhood details and character and physical traits about your famous person. I sure learned a lot more about Jane Goodall than our first book. So what I learned was that Jane, after she met with Louis Leakey, she went out into the forest to start her journey along the shores of Gombe in Tanzania. And there she was looking for chimpanzees, but at the beginning she couldn't find any, but she knew that they were hiding. Soon enough, she started to stay in the same spot, and these chimpanzees started to get closer to her. And she became so close with them that, unlike any scientist who typically numbers the animals they observe, she named them. One of them was named Flint and Fifi and Gigi. I thought that was so cool. Now, she also realized that some of the chimpanzees were mean, some of them were very kind, and she said that's kind of like humans too. But she also said, oh my gosh, make tools just like humans do. Furthermore, she spent 40 years researching. She got to write in a famous paper about her work, and for those 40 years she started to realize that the forests were endangered. They were being cut down, and then what happens is then the chimpanzees had no home. So after countless projects, she was really focused on protecting nature. And here's one of that sentence that stuck out to me, especially when we're talking about traits. Here's what it says. She was no longer just a courageous researcher, but also the most determined wildlife defender the world had ever seen. That's great. That tells me she's courageous, she's determined, she's a defender. All of those amazing traits to make Jane Goodall stand out. And so Jane now continues till this day to promote wildlife, protect our forests, and she really has made a huge impact on our world. I loved at the end of the story how it includes a timeline, and Jane was born in 1934 all the way to present. And I know that with reading this, I'm going to find out even more about her childhood. So biographies are amazing. We learn so much. And then in our next video, we're going to really focus in on challenges and what does legacy mean. Go ahead and comment down below and tell me what you think legacy means. And also comment down below to tell me if you were right. Did you believe a toy make a big impact on Jane Goodall later in her life? I look forward to seeing you on episode 3. Bye, reader.